"You don't own this gate." I froze. She was standing there on my property, pointing at the iron gate my grandfather built with his own hands. Her voice was sharp, her confidence absolute. But the truth, she didn't have it. Clutching my coffee, I watched as she rattled the gate, trying to force it open. Behind her, two others took pictures like I was some kind of violation waiting to happen. I had to say it. "I don't belong to your HOA. Her smile twisted. "We'll see about that." And that's when the game really began. I didn't grow up in a fancy neighborhood. I wasn't raised with the idea that a perfect lawn or matching mailboxes meant something special. No, I inherited a piece of land from my grandfather, and that meant more to me than any cookie-cutter development the world could throw at me. The land came first. 2 acres of open field purchased in 1963 when this area was nothing but dirt roads and wild grass. My grandfather, EMTT Corbett, was a man of quiet dignity. He'd spent 20 years of his life working carpentry, saving every penny he could to buy this patch of land. No bank involved, no debt, just hard work, sweat, and a dream. He didn't build a mansion or anything extravagant. What he built was a simple wooden house with his own 2 hands. The kind of place you'd find in an old photograph where the wind rustles the trees and everything feels in its place. Along with that house, he planted a hedge around the perimeter to keep the world at bay, and forged a strong iron gate out of scrap metal he'd collected over the years. The lock was brass hand-cast by him, and it still turned smoothly like it had when he first made it. I was 8 when he first showed me the property line. We walked together, the smell of fresh earth and wild grass in the air. He pointed at the stone markers he'd set, each one marking a boundary. "Boundaries aren't there to keep people out, Ellis," he said, hand resting on my shoulder. "They're reminders of what you protect." That was the lesson he taught me, simple and profound. When someone tries to take what's yours, paperwork is what saves you. He made sure I understood that. The original deed, the surveyor's report, the notary's stamp, it all mattered. It was the one thing that would stand between us and anyone who tried to take what wasn't theirs. When Grandpa passed away in 2018, the house and land became mine. No question. The will was clear. Everything went to his only grandson. I didn't sell it. I didn't even think about it. I moved in, converted the back room into a photography studio, and started restoring the place. The iron gate was my first project. I'd spend mornings brushing on the same black paint my grandfather had chosen. The oak trees around the property stood like sentinels, their roots older than the HOA itself. The first few weeks were spent just getting things in order. But while I was sorting through property records at the county office, something caught my eye, something that made me take a step back and think. There, on the official map of the neighborhood, was a clear boundary line for the Wellington Meadows Homeowners Association. They'd been formed in 2005, almost 42 years after my land had been purchased, and the map showed their jurisdiction stopped 50 meters before my gate. My property wasn't part of their community. It never had been. So I spent my days restoring the gate, repainting it, making it look like it did when my grandfather first installed it. And each morning, as I stood there with my coffee, I remembered his lesson. Boundaries were something to protect, something to defend. They weren't just lines on a map. They were a legacy, and I was determined to protect it. That was the world I lived in, quiet, predictable, and just as my grandfather had left it. But I should have known it wouldn't stay that way. It started like a quiet Saturday afternoon, the kind of day when everything feels still, and the only sound is the rustling of leaves in the wind. I was out by the eastern fence line trimming some of the dead branches from the oak tree that had stood there longer than I had. It was a ritual, something to keep the land in shape the way Grandpa would have done it. I didn't think much of it when I first heard the car's engine slow down outside the gate. People often drove by, maybe turned around in the gravel spot by the old fence post, but this time the engine cut off and the quiet stretched longer than usual. My hand froze on the pruning shears and I glanced up. There was no mistaking the posture of the figures standing just outside my property, stiff, formal, like they owned the ground they were standing on. I wiped sawdust off my hands and walked slowly to the window. 3 people stood there, dressed as if they were attending some kind of corporate meeting, not walking onto someone's property without so much as a knock. The woman in front wore a navy blazer even though it was hot outside. She had a clipboard in one hand, her phone in the other, snapping pictures of my gate, my house, my trees, everything that didn't belong to her. Behind her, 2 others in matching polos stood with their notepads pointing at parts of the property like they were conducting an inspection. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I didn't rush outside. No, I took my time. I let them stand there thinking they could do whatever they wanted. For a full minute, they just stood taking pictures and rattling the gate, trying to get it open like they had some right to be there. Then the woman pressed the doorbell. She held it down longer than needed, making sure the chime echoed through the house. I let them wait a little longer, watching from the window. Then I stepped outside. My boots crunched the gravel path beneath my feet as I approached the gate. I didn't unlock it. It felt right, the distance, the iron bars between us. A boundary. "Can I help you?" My voice was calm. I kept my hands visible and my posture relaxed. Grandpa always told me never escalate the situation unless you know exactly what you're dealing with. The woman straightened up, readjusting her blazer, and gave me a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "I'm Claudia Vance, president of the Wellington Meadows Homeowners Association. We need to inspect your property." I didn't flinch. Inspect it for what? Claudia's smile tightened, and she ticked off her reasons one after the other. "Your tree branches extend beyond the permitted boundary, your gate doesn't meet the aesthetic standards for this community, and you haven't paid your HOA dues this year." She rattled them off like they were charges in a courtroom. Each point felt more ridiculous than the last, but the worst part, she said it with such certainty, as if I should have already known that she had the authority to dictate every aspect of my property. I let the silence hang for a moment, giving her time to stew in the weight of her own words. Then I said the one thing I knew would stop her dead in her tracks. "I don't belong to the HOA." She laughed short and dismissive. "Every property in this radius belongs to the HOA. You can verify that on our website." I didn't back down. "I'm telling you, the HOA's boundary stops 50 meters before my gate. My land was registered in 1963. Your association didn't even exist until 2005. Do the math." One of the people behind her shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Claudia almost like they were waiting for her to correct me. But Claudia didn't miss a beat. "We'll verify that," she said, her voice cooling. "But in the meantime, you need to comply with this notice." She pulled a paper from her clipboard and pushed it through the gap in the gate bars. I took it knowing exactly what it would say: trim the oak tree within 14 days, replace the iron gate with one of the approved composite wood gates in beige, and pay back dues totaling $4,200 for the past 3 years. The fine print at the bottom mentioned a $150 daily penalty for non-compliance, and legal action could follow. I folded the paper in half, then again slipping it into my back pocket. "I won't be doing any of this," I said, my voice firm, not giving her an inch. Her face tightened, her earlier calm shattered. "You'll regret that decision," she warned, like a threat was hanging in the air, just waiting to drop. "We have legal counsel." "So do I," said, turning and walking back toward the house. I didn't look back, didn't watch them leave, just let the silence settle over the property again. When I heard their car doors slam and their engine roar to life, I stood still for a moment, letting it all sink in. They thought they could intimidate me. They thought they could use legal threats and bureaucratic nonsense to take what wasn't theirs. But they were wrong. That night, I walked the property line looking for any signs of where they'd been. I found boot prints near the eastern hedge, fresh impressions in the flower beds, where someone had been peering over the fence. They had been here before, and I knew it. I went inside, checked the footage from the security camera I'd installed when I inherited the place. But when I went to view it, the footage from the night before 15 minutes was gone, completely erased. At first I thought it was just a glitch, but then I understood. Someone had access to the local power grid. Someone who knew how to disable security systems remotely. I wasn't just dealing with an HOA president trying to enforce her will. This was personal. Claudia had been planning this, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The days after Claudia's visit dragged on. It was like waiting for a storm to break. I knew she wouldn't just walk away quietly, and I didn't expect her to. So I went to work. I gathered every document, every piece of evidence. The property records the county plat map from 2005, the deed from 1963. It all had to be airtight. I spent hours at the county office collecting notarized copies, checking every detail. The original surveyor's map was my cornerstone. My grandfather's land was older than the HOA by 42 years. I knew I had everything I needed. I also knew they wouldn't give up without a fight. Then the HOA called a special meeting. They emailed me saying I needed to explain myself. Explain myself, like I was a child in trouble. I couldn't let that slide. I wasn't going to back down. The room at the meeting was set up like a courtroom with the board members sitting in a semicircle. I walked in carrying my folder, calm but ready. I sat down and placed the folder on my lap, watching as Claudia stood at the head of the table, looking as if she already knew she was in charge. She started with the usual complaints: trees, gate, dues. "The gate doesn't meet our standards," she said, her tone clipped as though it was a simple matter. I let her finish. When she paused, I opened the folder. I laid out the county plat map for 2005 inches front of her. "This is your boundary," I said. I slid over the 1963 deed. "This is my property. They don't intersect. My land predates your HOA by 42 years. The room went silent. I could see Claudia's composure falter for a moment, but she quickly regained her smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. That map could be falsified, she said, but her voice lacked the certainty it had before. I pulled out a certified letter from the county land office, confirming the authenticity of the plat map. This confirms that my land is not part of your HOA, and it never has been. The tension in the room was palpable. The other board members glanced at each other uncomfortable. I didn't stop. I kept going. And I'm not going to comply with your demands. Your boundary stops at 50 meters before my gate. I don't owe you any dues. I don't need your permission to live on my property. Claudia's face tightened. She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. You don't have jurisdiction over me, Claudia. I don't belong to your HOA. And if you continue to harass me, I'll file charges for harassment. Her eyes flickered with panic. She wasn't ready for this. She quickly tried to change the subject, but I could see her losing control. Your gate is an eyesore. Your trees are overgrown. We have standards here, she said, trying to steer the conversation back to aesthetics. I closed the folder with a sharp snap. I'm not negotiating. I'm done here. I stood up, walked to the door, and left without a word. The silence that followed was thick. They had no idea what had just hit them. As I stepped outside, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. It wasn't over yet, but for the first time I felt like I was in control. I had the truth, and that was all I needed. The aftermath came quickly. The day after the meeting, I received a letter from the HOA. It wasn't a fine or another ridiculous notice. This one was an apology. Claudia had been removed as president, and the board had issued a statement confirming it. I didn't expect this level of success, but the relief was immediate. My grandfather's land was safe. The legacy he left me was still intact. Along with the letter, the new interim president, a woman from the community, sent a brief note. The HOA is taking immediate action to restore transparency and accountability. She also informed me that the HOA would be refunding $23 0-inches fines that had been unfairly imposed on homeowners under Claudia's leadership, fines that had no basis in reality, the very fines that had been used to bully people into compliance. Some neighbors avoided me, blaming me for ruining the community's reputation, but others stopped to thank me. A few admitted they had been too afraid to speak up against the HOA's tactics before. I didn't need to be thanked, but it felt good to know I wasn't the only one who had suffered. Then came the trial for Claudia's criminal charges. The forged letter, the trespassing, the video footage. She had no way out. She took a plea deal to avoid jail time, 6 months of a suspended sentence, 200 hours of community service, and a fine. The judge made it clear that her lack of a criminal history had played a role in her sentence, but ultimately justice had been served. I didn't feel satisfaction, though. Just closure. The truth had come out and Claudia had paid the price. But what followed was unexpected. Claudia's personal life fell apart. Her marriage ended in divorce. Within weeks, she had packed up and moved 3 counties away, far from the community she had once ruled. I didn't feel joy in her misfortune, but I couldn't deny that there was some justice in it. Back at home, life slowly returned to normal. The land, my grandfather's land, stood as it always had. The gate was restored to its original beauty. I replaced the lock with one made by a craftsman who understood the value of quality. I installed a new security system, but this time I made sure it was discreet, hidden, just like my grandfather's legacy. The mornings returned to their quiet, routine, coffee in hand, standing at the gate, watching the trees move in the wind. It felt right. The battles I had fought were over, and I had won. But it wasn't just about the victory. It was about what I had protected: the land, the gate, the history my grandfather had left behind. A few months later, the new interim HOA president contacted me. She thanked me for forcing the changes that should have been made long ago. The HOA had started shifting. No more threats, no more intimidation. It was becoming more transparent and accountable. I didn't need to join the HOA. That was never the point. My land would remain separate, just as it had always been. One morning, as I stood at the gate with my coffee, a child from a nearby house paused and asked, "Why don't you get a new one?" I smiled and replied, "Because this one has a story." It wasn't just a gate, it was a symbol of everything my grandfather had worked for, of the legacy he had created. The child nodded, still not fully understanding. But that was fine. I didn't need recognition from anyone else. What mattered was that I knew what it meant to protect something worth keeping. I closed the gate behind me, the brass lock clicking into place. The sound of that lock wasn't just security. It was the sound of certainty, the knowledge that the land was mine and would always remain mine. The land that had been my grandfather's and now mine would stand for years to come, just as it always had. As I walked back to the house, I felt peace. The battle was over, and I had won. Not for glory or revenge, but for the memory of my grandfather and for the land he'd left me. Some things are worth fighting for, and this was one of them.